I am 76 years old, and until this past November I believed the worst thing that could happen to a man had already happened to me. I was wrong about that. Losing your wife is grief. Watching somebody try to erase her is something else entirely. There isn't a good word for it. I've looked. My name is Walter Hale. I built the house I'm sitting in with my own hands in the summer of 1974, board by board, on 4 acres outside Ashford, Vermont. I'm telling you this because I want you to understand that when I say my house, I mean it in a way most people don't anymore. I know where every nail is. I know which stair complains in February. I know the exact spot on the kitchen floor where my wife used to stand and hum while she waited on the coffee. Her name was Nora. She taught elementary school music in this town for 31 years, and if you grew up here between 1976 and 2007, she taught you how to hold a recorder without dropping it. She passed 11 years ago this spring. And this is the story of how my 9-year-old granddaughter, a little girl who never got to meet her grandmother, not once, not for a single minute, put her bare hand into a burning wood stove to save the only thing left of that woman's voice. Her own mother stood 4 feet away and watched her do it. I'm not telling you this for sympathy, friend. I'm telling you because I spent 3 years being polite when I should have been loud, and if you're sitting in a house like mine, with somebody in it who talks about your life like it's a problem to be solved, I'd like you to be smarter than I was. It started, I suppose, the way these things always start. Quietly, with a smile. My son Daniel is 43. He manages a farm supply store out on Route 12, and he's the kindest man I know, which in this story turns out to be a complication rather than a virtue. He married Vanessa Cole 11 years ago, 6 months before his mother died. Nora met her exactly twice. She never said a word against her. But I remember Nora sitting on the porch that fall, watching Daniel's truck pull out of the driveway, and she said, without turning her head, "That girl looks at this house the way a man looks at a used car." I laughed. I told her she was being unkind. She wasn't being unkind. She was being accurate. Vanessa sells real estate over in the county seat. She's good at it. I'll give her that. She has a way of walking into a room and pricing it. Not judging it. Pricing it. 3 years ago, Daniel lost his hours at the store for a stretch, and they came to stay with me while they got back on their feet. It was supposed to be 4 months. It became 3 years, says. And in those 3 years, I learned what it feels like to become a guest in a house you built. It was small at first. She'd rearrange the kitchen. She'd tell me the wallpaper in the hallway was aggressive. She'd sigh when I told a story at dinner, a long theatrical sigh, so that Daniel would hear it and change the subject. She'd walk through the living room and say, to no one, "It's like living in a museum where nobody bought a ticket." I want to be honest with you because I think honesty is the only thing I've got left to offer. I did try. I want that on the record. In the second year, on a Sunday in March, I stood in my own kitchen, and I told her plainly that she was welcome in my home and free to leave it. I said it calm. I said it once. I told her that if the house offended her so much, there were other houses and I'd help her load the truck myself. She smiled at me. She said, "Daniel, your father just threatened to put your family on the street." And my son, my good, tired, decent son, put his hand on my arm and asked me, "Please, Dad, not tonight." Here's the part I need you to understand, because I've read what people say about men like me and I know how it looks from the outside. It looks like weakness. It wasn't weakness, it was arithmetic. If I threw Vanessa out, Daniel went with her. And if Daniel went with her, Nell went with them. Nell is my granddaughter. It, 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 it's... She was 6 then. She had my wife's laugh, which is a thing I still cannot talk about without stopping for a second. So I did the math the way any grandfather would. I could have my dignity or I could have my granddaughter. I chose Nell. Every single time, for 3 years, I chose Nell. I choose her again. Now let me tell you about the violin, because everything in this story is really about the violin. I made it. That surprises people. I spent 40 years building furniture tables, chairs, cabinets, the honest kind of work, but in the winter of 1971, I decided I was going to build Nora a violin for our wedding. I had no business trying. It took me 14 months. I ruined 2 spruce tops and a set of ribs before I got one that would hold a note. But in the end I had it, maple back, spruce belly, and her name burned into the scroll in letters no bigger than a grain of rice. Nora. She played it for 36 years. She played it at recitals and at funerals and in this living room on Christmas Eve with the lights off. That violin has her fingerprints worn into the varnish on the neck. There's a spot up near the first position where the finish is gone entirely, down to the bare wood, because of the way she used to slide her hand. You cannot replace that. I want to say that clearly, because it matters later. I have hundreds of photographs of my wife, boxes of them. I have her handwriting on the back of every recipe card in that kitchen. Photographs I could reprint, cards I could copy. I have exactly one recording of her voice. 6 weeks before she died, when she'd gotten too weak to play but could still sing a little, she asked me to bring the old cassette recorder up from the workshop. She said she wanted to leave something for the grandchildren she wasn't going to meet. She wrote a lullaby that fall words and music both, the only song she ever wrote in her life, and she sang it into that machine in 3 takes because she kept losing her breath. At the end of the 3rd take, you can hear her laugh. You can hear her say, "Well, that'll have to do." That tape lived in the violin case, tucked under the neck rest, for 11 years. The case sat on the shelf beside the woodstove in the front room. And that is where my granddaughter found it the summer she turned 7, when she was rummaging for something to do on a rainy afternoon. I heard the tape playing from the hallway and I had to sit down on the stairs. Nell came out holding the recorder with both hands like it was full of water. She said, "Grandpa, is that her?" I said it was. She said, "She sounds happy," and she asked me to play it again. And then, again. And after that, every Sunday, for 2 years, it was the same ritual. Sunday afternoon, the 2 of us, the tape, and then 20 minutes of her asking me questions about a woman she'd never met. What did Grandma eat for breakfast? Was she funny? Did she like dogs? Was she strict? And the one she always got around to in that careful voice kids use when they're not sure they're allowed to ask. "Do you think she would have liked me, Grandpa?" I told her the truth. I told her that her grandmother had been waiting her whole life for a granddaughter, and that if the 2 of them had ever gotten in a room together, the rest of us would have had to leave. That fall, Nell started violin in the school music program. Free instrument, group lessons Tuesdays. She was 9 and she was terrible at it, in the specific joyful way that 9-year-olds are terrible at things. And every Tuesday she'd come home and stand in the front room and play me 4 squeaking notes and take a bow like she'd finished a concerto. Vanessa hated it. She said it sounded like a cat in a door. She said it was another one of Grandpa's projects. She wasn't wrong that it was mine. She was wrong about what it was. Said. She was wrong about what it was. Now, I need to back up and tell you about the paperwork, because I didn't understand what I was looking at until much later, and I want you to understand it before I did. 2 weeks before all this happened, I came in from the workshop and found Vanessa's mother sitting at my kitchen table, Diane Cole, 64 years old, 30 years as a paralegal in a firm down in Rutland, retired now, and if Vanessa is a woman who prices rooms, Diane is a woman who reads them. She's quiet. She's polite. She calls me Mr. Hale in a way that manages to sound like an insult and a compliment at the same time. She was up from Rutland, helping with some things. There was a folder on my table. Vanessa slid it toward me and said it was nothing, just a formality, just some paperwork so that somebody could handle the utility accounts and the insurance if I ever got sick. I said I wasn't sick. Diane smiled and said, "Nobody ever is, Mr. Hale." And then one day they are. I told them I'd read it later. I put it on the shelf, by the door. I never did read it, because I'm 76 and I'd rather do almost anything than read 11 pages of small type. That folder is going to matter. Hold on to it. The other thing I want you to know about is Nell's school tablet, because it was sitting on the mantel that night for a reason that had nothing to do with any of this. Her 4th grade class had a family history project. Each kid was supposed to record an interview with the oldest person in their house and turn in 5 minutes of it. She'd been at me about it for a week. She'd propped that tablet up on the mantel, leaned against the clock, aimed at the 2 chairs by the stove, and she'd hit record on a Tuesday and gotten about 90 seconds in before dinner. She never turned it off. 9-year-olds don't turn things off. It sat there for 3 days with the screen dark and the little red light on, filling up a memory card with the sound of my house. 3 days. Now let me tell you about that Thursday. It was the 2nd week of November and it had turned cold early that year. The the kind of cold that comes down out of the notch and sits on the valley like a hand. I'd had the stove going since 4. Daniel was at the store until 7. Nell was on the rug in front of the fire doing homework on her stomach with her feet in the air. And Vanessa came home in a mood. I could hear it in the way the storm door hit the frame. Diane came in behind her. And they'd been out together all afternoon, and I found out later exactly where, but at the time all I knew was that my daughter-in-law came into my front room with her coat still on and stopped and looked at the shelf beside the stove the way you'd look at a dead animal in the road. "That has to go," she said. I asked her what did. "The case. The whole shrine. All of it." She pointed at the violin case, and then at the mantel, and then, honestly, at the entire room. "I have shown 11 houses this month, Walter. 11. And every one of them is a home where people live. This is a mausoleum, and I am done living in a mausoleum." I said what I always said. I said, "It's a violin, Vanessa. It sits on a shelf. It doesn't bother anybody." And she said the thing that told me the ground had shifted. She said, "It bothers me. She's been dead 11 years, and she still runs this house. Her name is on the mailbox. Her handwriting is in the kitchen." 22. My daughter goes to sleep listening to a dead woman sing. Her voice climbed. "Do you know what that is? That's not memory, Walter. That's a haunting. And I'm the only one in this family with the spine to say it out loud. I want you to notice something. She wasn't ashamed. That's the part I still can't get over. She said it in front of her own child, in a raised voice, and she was proud of herself for it." Nell had stopped writing. She was still on her stomach on the rug, but her pencil wasn't moving, and I watched my granddaughter go very small and very still the way children do when the weather changes in a room. Diane spoke up from the doorway, calm as a bank teller. She said, "Vanessa, not tonight," which sounds like she was stopping her. She wasn't. I've turned that moment over 100 times since, and I promise you that was a woman telling her daughter not yet. Not no. But Vanessa was past listening. She crossed the room in 4 steps and took the case off the shelf. I got up. And I'm 76 with a bad hip, and I got up faster than I've moved in a decade, and I said her name. She had the case open before I'd cleared the chair. She had the violin out by the neck, holding it the way you'd hold something you found in a drain, and the cassette recorder came out with it and hit the hearthstone and cracked, and the tape door popped open, and the tape itself skittered out onto the stone. "Vanessa," I said, "put it down." She looked right at me. She had all the time in the world. "You need to let her go," she said. "Somebody has to make you." And she turned and put my wife's violin into the woodstove. I have thought a great deal about how to describe the next few seconds, and I've decided the truth is that I don't remember them well because I was screaming and my body was not doing what I told it to. I know the stove door was open because I'd fed it at 6. I know it went in neck first. I know that spruce that's been drying for 50 years does not burn like ordinary wood. It goes up like paper. It took the varnish first, and it made a sound, a sort of low complaint, all 4 strings going at once as they let go, and then it was just a shape inside the fire, and then it wasn't a shape at all. The whole thing took about 11 seconds. 14 months of my hands, 36 years of hers. And then there was a small body moving past me. Nell wasn't going for the violin. Vex. I need you to understand that, because it's the thing that undoes me. She was 9 years old, and she was faster and smarter than any adult in that room, and she knew the violin was gone the second it went in. She was going for the tape. It had slid off the hearthstone. It had gone in along the bottom edge of the firebox, right at the mouth, half in and half out, and the plastic shell was already going soft and dark. She hit the floor on her knees, and she reached in and she picked it up. I heard it. I'm sorry. But I did. 1917. I believe matter. There's a sound, and then there's a smell, and if you've never had cause to know either one, I hope to God you never do. She came out with it. She fell backward onto the rug with her hand, curled shut around that tape, and she screamed not a child's scream, something older than that, and I was on the floor with her, and I was shouting for water, and the tape was smoking in her fist, and she would not open her fingers. She would not let go of it. I had to pry it out. And Vanessa said, and this is verbatim, "Friend, this is on the recording and I have heard it more times than I ever wanted to." Vanessa sighed, an irritated, put upon, inconvenienced sigh, and she said, "Oh, for God's sake, Nell. It's a tape. Not a scream. Not a step forward. Not 1 inch of her body moved toward her burned child. Her mother had just watched her daughter's hand go into a fire, and the thing she felt was annoyed. I got Nell to the kitchen sink. I want to tell you exactly what I did, because I've since learned that a lot of folks get this wrong. I ran cool water, not cold, not ice, cool over that hand, and I kept it there. I did not put butter on it. I did not put ice on it. I did not wrap it tight. I got a clean dish towel, wet, and laid it over loose, and I kept the water going, and with my other hand I took my phone off the counter and I dialed 911. Not the doctor's office. Not the hospital switchboard. 911. I've heard people say they'd know what to do, and maybe they would. But I'll tell you what saved me, and it wasn't courage. It was that Nora made me take a first aid course at the church in 1998, and I complained about it for a week. 30 years later, a woman on a telephone told me I was doing it right, and I nearly went to my knees with relief. The dispatcher stayed on the line. She had a nice, flat, steady voice. She asked me the child's age and the size of the burn and whether the skin was broken, and she told me to keep the water running and keep the child talking, and she said an ambulance was 11 minutes out. And in the middle of all of that, my son came home. Daniel walked into his own kitchen at 7:15 on a Thursday and found his father on the floor by the sink with his daughter's arm under the tap, a wet towel, a smell in the air that a man does not have to be told the meaning of, and a phone on speaker with a dispatcher on it. He didn't shout. That's what I remember. Everybody expects the shouting. He knelt down. He looked at Nell's hand. He asked her, very gently, if she could wiggle her fingers, and she could, a little, and she started crying harder when he said her name. Then he stood up and he turned around, and Vanessa was standing in the kitchen doorway with her coat still on. And she said, I want you to hear this, she said. Daniel, before you say anything, your father let her do it. He looked at his wife for a long moment. And then, my son said 5 words. He said them quiet. He didn't raise his voice 1 degree. He said, pack your things. We're done. That's all. That's the whole thing. And I watched Vanessa Hale's legs go out from under her. She sat straight down onto my kitchen floor with her coat still buttoned, and she put her hands flat on the linoleum, and she made a sound I'd never heard out of her in 11 years. Because she'd finally hit the one thing she'd been sure would never move. The ambulance took Nell and Daniel at 7:26. He asked me to come. I told him to go, that I'd follow in the truck, that I needed 2 minutes to find my keys and shut the stove damper. That was the mistake. That was my mistake, and I own it. Because I was alone in that house with those 2 women, and I had no idea yet what they'd been doing in Rutland all afternoon. I was in the front room, pulling the damper, when I heard the kitchen door lock, then footsteps, then Vanessa's voice behind me, and it was not the voice that had been on the floor 10 minutes earlier. That voice was gone entirely. Whatever was underneath had come up. You're not going anywhere, she said. I turned around. She was between me and the hallway. Diane was behind her with her arms folded. I said, Vanessa, my granddaughter is on her way to the hospital. Your granddaughter, she said, is in the hospital because you raised my husband to love a ghost more than his own family. You did this. You've done it for 11 years. And now he's saying 5 words to me in my own kitchen. I said it was my kitchen, and that was the wrong thing to say, and I knew it before it was all the way out. She came across that room and got hold of my arm above the elbow, and I want to be honest about something, because I've read men online saying no woman could ever move them. I'm 76 years old. I've had a hip replaced. She was 39 and she was in a rage, and she walked me backward down my own hallway like I was furniture. I got a hand on the doorframe. It didn't matter. She put me in the workshop. That's the back room off the mudroom, the one with the bench and the tools and 50 years of sawdust in the floorboards. There's a hasp and a padlock on the outside because I keep chisels in there, and there'd been a little girl in the house. I put that lock on myself, in 2019, to protect my granddaughter. She shut the door and I heard the hasp drop. Now here's where I have to tell you something, and I've gone back and forth about whether to, because I know exactly how it sounds. I could have gotten out. There's a window over the bench. Single pane, 30-year-old glass, and there was a 2-pound mallet lying 18 inches from my hand. I picked it up. I had it raised. I could have put that window out in one swing and been standing in my own side yard in under 10 seconds. I didn't swing it, because through the wall, and that wall is nothing but lath and 100 years of horsehair plaster, I could hear them in the mudroom, and Diane Cole was saying something about the notary. And I set the mallet down on the bench, and I took my phone out of my shirt pocket and I pressed record. Friend, I want to say this plainly, because I think it's the only genuinely smart thing I did that whole night. I've spent my life fixing things with my hands. Every instinct I had was telling me to break the glass. But a man my age gets out that window, and then what? I stand in the yard in the dark, and it's my word against two of them, and one of them has spent 30 years in a law office learning exactly how a man's word gets taken apart. I didn't need to get out. I needed proof. So I sat down on an upturned bucket in the dark, with my ear against the plaster, and I listened to my daughter-in-law and her mother plan the rest of my life. It took about 9 minutes, and it was the coldest 9 minutes I've ever spent. Diane did most of the talking. She was the one with the plan. I understood that within 30 seconds. She said the paperwork was signed and notarized that afternoon in Rutland, which is where the two of them had been. She said the signature was handled. She said that with the power of attorney in place and with a physician's statement, the property could be listed inside of 90 days. And Vanessa said, "What about tonight? He's going to say I locked him in." And Diane said, calm, unhurried, like a woman reading a grocery list, "Then we get ahead of it. He's been declining for a year. He's been confused. He got aggressive with you tonight, in front of the child, and there was an accident with the stove, and you had to secure him for everyone's safety until help arrived. You called the ambulance yourself. You're the one who kept everybody calm. Daniel won't believe that." "Daniel," Diane said, "will believe whatever keeps his daughter out of a courtroom." There was a pause. I could hear the refrigerator running. Then Vanessa said, "And the house?" And Diane said, "The house was always the point." I sat in the dark in my own workshop with my wife's varnish still in the air from the front room and my granddaughter's burned hand 30 minutes down the highway, and I listened to two women decide that I was going to be declared a confused, violent old man, so that a developer could put 4 lots on the field where Nora used to hang the sheets. And I want to tell you what I felt. It wasn't fear. I'd had the fear already, out in the hallway. It was a kind of terrible calm, because they had just said all of it, out loud, 12 feet from a telephone on a bench in a dark room. They'd been so busy making me small, they forgot to check whether I was listening. The state police came at 8:40. I heard the tires. I heard Vanessa's voice change back into the sweet one, the company voice, and I heard the front door, and I heard her tell an officer that her father-in-law had had an episode, and she'd had to secure him for his own safety, and thank God they were here. Then boots in the hallway. The hasp came up. One point, the door opened and a flashlight hit me in the face, and behind it were 2 troopers, and behind them was my son, still in his work jacket, and his face was a thing I hope I never see again. He'd called them from the hospital parking lot. He'd called them the second the doors closed on his daughter, because his wife hadn't followed the ambulance, and a man who's known somebody 11 years knows what that means. One of the troopers asked if I was Walter Hale. I said I was. I said my daughter-in-law had put me in that room and taken the key, and that she and her mother had spent the last hour rehearsing a story to tell them. And Vanessa said, from the hallway, that I was confused, that I'd been getting worse, that it was so hard on all of them, that she'd been begging Daniel to get me evaluated for a year. And I held up my phone. I recorded it, I said, all of it, from about 7:40 on. I have never in my life watched 2 faces do what those faces did. Diane Cole understood first. She'd spent 30 years in a law office. She knew precisely what a recording meant, in Vermont, in a house where the man holding the phone was a party to nothing but his own imprisonment. She didn't argue. She just closed her eyes, once, slowly, like a woman setting down something heavy. Vanessa kept talking for another 20 seconds. That was worse. The senior trooper, a big fellow, 60-ish, gray mustache, gentlest voice you ever heard, took my phone and stepped into the kitchen and played it. And my house filled up with my daughter-in-law's voice explaining how she'd tell the police I'd attacked her, and her mother's voice explaining how the signature had been handled. Then, in the quiet after, I told them about the folder on the shelf by the front door, the one I'd never read. They found it in 90 seconds. Power of attorney, dated 8 days earlier, notarized that afternoon in Rutland, with my signature on it. I have never signed a power of attorney in my life. Both of them were arrested in my front room. It. I stood by the stove where my wife's violin had been an hour and a half earlier, and I listened to a state trooper read out charges. And I'm going to list them because I think the specifics matter and because I know you'd want to hear them. Unlawful restraint, reckless endangerment of a child, conspiracy, forgery of a legal instrument, and exploitation of a vulnerable adult, which, I learned that night, is what the state of Vermont calls it when somebody tries to take an old man's house out from under him. Vanessa cried. Real crying. Finally, the first honest thing she'd done all night. She said it was a misunderstanding. She said she was Daniel's wife. She said, "This is my home." The trooper with the gray mustache said, "No, ma'am, it isn't. They put them in separate cars." Diane didn't look at anybody. Vanessa looked at me the whole way down the walk, and there wasn't 1 ounce of sorrow in it, and I understood then that there never had been, and that I'd spent 3 years being kind to a woman who had been measuring my rooms. Daniel and I drove to the hospital at 10 o'clock, and neither of us said a word for the first 15 miles. Then he said, "I should have listened to you," and I said, "You should have listened to your mother." He laughed, and it came out cracked and wrong, but it was a laugh, and it was the first sound of my son I'd heard in about 3 years. And Nell was awake. 2nd-degree burns across the palm and the inside of 3 fingers, with a patch on the base of the thumb they were watching. Loose dressing, elevated, and a great deal of medicine. She was gray and sleepy and furious about the IV. She saw me, and the first thing she said before hello, before anything was, "Grandpa, did it work?" And I had to hold onto the bed rail, because the tape had gone in the ambulance in a specimen bag, and I'd carried it into that hospital in my coat pocket, and I hadn't yet had the courage to look at it. The shell was ruined, melted along one edge, warped, the little window fogged white. But the tape inside had not burned. The shell had taken it. That's what plastic does, it dies, so the thing inside doesn't. I told her I didn't know yet. I told her we'd find out together. 10. And she said, "I couldn't get the violin, Grandpa. I'm sorry. It was too far in. 9 years old. Hand wrapped like a boxing glove. Apologizing to me. And I want to tell you what I said, because I got it right, and I don't get much right. I said, 'Sweetheart, you didn't go in for the violin. You went in for her voice.' And that's the only part I couldn't have made again. Here's how it came out. Vanessa took a plea. Diane didn't, and Diane got the worse end of it, which was correct, because Diane was the architect and everybody in that courtroom knew it. 30 years of paralegal work, and she used every bit of it to try to steal a house from a 76-year-old man and to teach her daughter it was smart. She'll be in state custody until 2029. Vanessa served 14 months. The forgery was what did it. Judges have opinions about a signature. The power of attorney was voided. The house is mine, and when I'm done with it, it's Daniel's, and after that it's Nell's, and I have that in writing now, from an attorney in Montpelier who is not related to anybody in this story. The divorce was final in June. Vanessa has supervised visitation, twice a month, at a family center in the next county. That's not my doing, and it isn't Daniel's. That's a judge who read the file and listened to 9 minutes of audio and looked at a photograph of a child's hand. Daniel and Nell live here now. He's got the whole upstairs. He's lighter, you can see it in his shoulders. It turns out a man can be tired for 11 years and not know it's a choice. And the tape. A fellow in Burlington who restores old audio did it for free when he heard what it was. Took him 3 weeks. He got every second of it, all 3 takes, including the ones where she runs out of breath, including the laugh at the end, including, well, that'll have to do. It's in 4 places. Now, it's on a hard drive, it's on the cloud, it's on a disk in a safe deposit box in town, and it's on my phone, which I keep in my shirt pocket like a fool. Nobody is ever burning that woman's voice again. There's one more thing. When they cleaned out the stove, they found the scroll. Just the scroll, the carved head of the violin, the piece with her name on it, charred black on one side but whole, because it was the thickest piece of wood in the instrument, and it had rolled to the back where the fire wasn't hot. Nora, still there, grain of rice. I built a new violin around it. Took me 7 months, and my hands aren't what they were. And it is not as good an instrument as the first one. I don't care. The 7 months, Mats, the 7 months, I don't care. It has a scorched scroll and a bad seam on the treble side, and it is the finest thing I have ever made. Nell has been playing it since the physical therapy finished. Her hand doesn't move like it used to, the scar tissue across the palm pulls when she stretches, and she can't do a proper fourth finger yet and maybe never will. Her teacher works around it. 2 Sundays ago she stood in that front room, next to the stove, and played her grandmother's lullaby all the way through for the first time. Slow. About 6. Wrong notes. The Braxess. I sat in Nora's chair and I did not do a good job of holding it together. Afterward she came and sat on the arm of the chair and I looked at her hand, the shine of it, the way the skin catches the light different, and she saw me looking, and she turned it over and showed me the palm on purpose. She said, "I don't cover it up at school anymore." I asked her why not, and my granddaughter said, "Because it's where I caught her." So that's the story, friend. People ask me if I'm bitter. I'm not. Bitterness is for men who lost. I've got my son back, I've got my granddaughter under my roof, I've got a house that's still mine, and I've got a dead woman's voice singing in it on Sunday afternoons. Vanessa Cole has a visitation schedule and a felony. I'd say the accounting came out about right, but I'll leave you with the question I can't put down. And I'd truly like to hear what you think, because I've turned it over for 9 months and I still don't have a clean answer. I chose the piece for 3 years. I swallowed it, and I told myself I was doing it for Nell, and I believed that, and I still believe it, and my granddaughter has a scar on her hand for the rest of her life. So where's the line? At what point does keeping the peace between grown-ups stop being kindness and start being the thing that gets a child hurt? If you've got somebody in your house who talks about your life like it's clutter, don't wait as long as I did. That's all I've got. Don't wait 3 years. And if there's a voice you love that only exists in one place in this world, go make a copy of it tonight. Right now, before you do another thing. You'd be amazed what a fire can take from you in 11 seconds.